Most people believe that this ocean is entirely blue, but in reality, it's green. From fake countries to impossible mountains, from lying maps to twisted facts about famous places, the truth is stranger than you think. Now, let's get started with our countdown of the 50 biggest geography lies that you believed. 50 biggest geography lies. Today I will explain only 25.50. Mount Everest isn't the tallest mountain. Let's start with the big one. Everyone knows Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth, right? Wrong. This is probably the biggest lie in geography. The real tallest mountain is Mount Key in Hawaii. From base to peak, it's 33,500 feet tall. That's 4,500 feet taller than Everest. The only reason nobody talks about this is because most of Mauna Kea is underwater, so technically, you'd need scuba gear to climb the world's actual tallest mountain. 49. The Sahara Desert isn't just sand. When people picture the Sahara, they see endless sand dunes, but sand only covers about 25% of the Sahara. Most of it is actually rocky plateaus, gravel plains, and mountains. The sand dune image comes from movies and postcards, but it's not what most of the Sahara actually looks like. 48. The Red Sea isn't red. The Red Sea has red right in the name, so the water must be red, right? Wrong. The water is actually blue like any other sea. The name comes from seasonal algae blooms that sometimes create reddish patches, but 99% of the time it looks like normal blue ocean water. 47. Alaska isn't huge on a global scale. Speaking of map lies, Alaska looks enormous on most maps, bigger than Brazil or Australia. Brazil is 5 times bigger than Alaska, and Australia is 4 times bigger. The same map distortion that makes Greenland look massive also makes Alaska look like a giant when it's actually much smaller than you think. 46. The Caspian Sea is a lake. The Caspian Sea is a sea and it's salty like an ocean, but it's actually the world's largest lake. It's completely surrounded by land with no connection to any ocean. We just call it a sea because it's so big and salty, but geographically it's a lake. 45. Rivers don't always flow north to south. This seems logical because we think of north as up and south as down on maps, but rivers flow downhill, and downhill can be in any direction. The Nile flows north, the Mississippi flows south, and the Amazon flows east. Rivers don't care about your map directions, they just follow gravity. 44. Holland and the Netherlands are not the same. Millions of people think Holland is a country. It's not. Holland is just one region inside the Netherlands. Calling the whole country Holland is like calling all of America Texas. Some Dutch people actually get annoyed when you do this, so now you know better. 43. Africa is mostly in the northern hemisphere. Look at most maps and Africa seems like it's mostly below the equator. Wrong again. Almost 2/3 of Africa is actually in the northern hemisphere. Countries like Egypt, Libya, Algeria, and most of Nigeria are all north of the equator. 42. Australia gets tons of snow. Everyone thinks Australia is just hot deserts and beaches. Well, Australia gets tons of snow. Some years they get over 9 feet of snow in the mountains. Australia even has ski resorts and has produced Olympic gold medalists in skiing. The whole Australia is always hot thing is completely fake. 41. Finland has more saunas than cars. Here's a weird one that sounds reasonable. Finland has about 3.2 million vehicles for 5.5 million people. But they actually have over 3 million saunas. That means there are more saunas than cars. In Finland, saunas are literally everywhere. Homes, offices, even embassies have them. 40. Kansas City is primarily in Missouri. This seems obvious, right? Kansas City should be in Kansas. Well, the main Kansas City is actually in Missouri. There is a smaller Kansas City in Kansas, but when people talk about Kansas City, they usually mean the Missouri one. This is geographic naming at its most confusing. 39. Sydney is not Australia's capital. Sydney is Australia's most famous city with the Opera House and Harbour Bridge, so it must be the capital, right? Nope. The capital is Canberra, a city most people have never heard of. They made Canberra the capital in 1913 because Sydney and Melbourne couldn't stop fighting over which one should be the capital. 38. South Africa has 3 capitals. Well, South Africa actually has 3 capitals. The administrative capital is Pretoria, the judicial capital is Bloemfontein, and the legislative capital is Cape Town. Most countries have 1 capital, but South Africa decided to split it up between 3 different cities. 37. Geneva is not Switzerland's capital. Geneva sounds important and international, so it should be Switzerland's capital. Wrong. It's actually Bern, which is only the fifth largest city in Switzerland. Same with Zurich, also not the capital. This pattern happens a lot where the biggest, most famous city isn't the capital. 36. New Mexico is a U.S. state. Surprisingly, many Americans think New Mexico is actually part of Mexico, not a U.S. state. New Mexico has been a U.S. state since 1912, longer than Alaska and Hawaii. But the name confuses people so much that New Mexico had to put New Mexico, USA on their license plates to stop the confusion. 35. Iceland and Greenland aren't exact opposites. Everyone knows this fun fact, that Iceland is actually green and Greenland is actually icy, and the Vikings named them backwards to trick people. This is partially true, but mostly fake. Iceland was named Iceland because of its icy fjords, and Greenland was named to attract settlers. However, Iceland isn't actually that green. 34. Alaska is America's easternmost state. Look at a U.S. map and Maine is clearly the farthest east, right? Technically wrong. Alaska's Aleutian Islands actually cross the $180 meridian, which means part of Alaska is so far west that it's actually east. So, Alaska is both the westernmost and easternmost U.S. state. 33. Madagascar is much bigger than Britain. On most world maps, Madagascar and Great Britain look about the same size. In reality, Madagascar is twice as big as Britain. This is another victim of map projection lies that make everything near the equator look smaller than it really is. 32. Columbus didn't discover the Earth was round. This is taught in schools everywhere, a total myth. People in Columbus's time already knew the Earth was round. Even the ancient Hindu scriptures mentioned this. The idea that medieval people thought the world was flat is a complete fabrication that somehow made it into textbooks. 31. Toilets don't flush differently in Australia. The Coriolis effect makes water swirl differently in different hemispheres, so toilets must flush the opposite direction in Australia, right? Completely false. The Coriolis effect only works on massive scales like hurricanes. Your toilet water swirls based on the direction the water jets are pointed, not which hemisphere you're in. 30. There are more than 24 time zones. Basic math says 24 hours equals 24 time zones around the world. Reality is much weirder. There are actually more than 24 time zones because some countries use half-hour and quarter-hour offsets. There are many countries that don't fit the neat 24-zone system at all. 29. The Panama Canal doesn't go east to west. The Panama Canal connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, so it must go east to west, right? Wrong. Look at a map closely. It actually goes northwest to southeast. Panama has a weird shape that makes the canal run in a totally different direction than you'd expect. 28. Route 66 isn't America's longest highway. Route 66 is famous as America's ultimate road trip, so it must be the longest highway. It's not even close. Route 66 is about 2,400 miles long. The longest highway is actually U.S. Route 20, which stretches over 3,300 miles from Boston to Oregon. 27. Hawaii is America's southernmost state. Before Hawaii became a state, Florida was the southernmost. But now, Hawaii is way further south, almost reaching the $21 St. dollar parallel, much closer to the equator than Key West, Florida. 26. Egypt is geographically in Africa. Most people think of Egypt as a Middle Eastern country. Geographically, Egypt is in Africa. It's an African country that shares borders with other African nations. The confusion comes because Egypt is often grouped culturally with Middle Eastern countries, but location-wise, it's definitely African. Upcoming next videos.